it is nice to be home. Be here, home. Uh, there are a few little differences I've picked up. I think during our first hymn that we were singing, I was going, now why is everybody going like this? And I realized after a short period of time that y'all have these things. And I was back here just thinking, y'all are looking funny or something like that. and something Jesse said just towards the end there about the past, I realized that when all that music was playing, correct me if I'm wrong, but y'all had a little montage of people who have passed away. I had no idea while that was playing and I'm sorry I wasn't sitting out there looking at people I knew and loved. Oh, that's special that you do that. And here on homecoming, I'm reminded. Well, first I want to tell you that Shane is thankful that I'm feeling good today. I was thinking, some of y'all remember this too. One day I came in and I wasn't feeling good at Capers Chapel, but by the time I got here, I was feeling horrible. It's something I call like the 12 or 2 or 3 hour flu or something, but the choir heard me go into the back room throwing up and stuff like that, and I said, I just don't think I can do it, so I'm just going to sit out here. I'll listen to it, and if I feel good enough to come out and do the sermon when it's time, I'll come out. And after a while, Shane comes back. He says, I know you're a scam. I mean, I know what you do. That you have your notes and you're reading them. He said, I could just read those for you. I said, okay. And he did. And it was beautiful. He did a wonderful job without having read it beforehand. His reading was wonderful. And what'd you like to do today? So I'm feeling good, but if you're up to it, this is okay. But here on homecoming, I do want to tell one homecoming story, and it's something else Jesse said just reminded me of this. Is a missionary who is retiring, and he's coming into port in New York, and when he's there's another ship there. It was the end of World War II, and there were soldiers coming back from the war, and people were greeting them, and there was cheering and just amazing greeting, hugging, and I think there's pictures of people kissing too. But his entry was quiet. He comes in and he gets to the train station and he heads to mid-America somewhere, and there's no crowds at the train stations, and he gets to his hometown. He gets off and there's nobody there. And he's kind of saying to himself, he says, Lord, I've been serving you in the mission field for over 50 years. And here I'm coming home, and nobody's greeting me. There's no celebration. And he says, well, it's one of those where you can almost hear somebody saying something. And he hears his voice say, you're not home yet. We all have a homecoming. And it's hard to imagine how wonderful it's going to be. I almost forgot to put my preaching glasses on. I tried this at Capers and I couldn't. I would have had to call Shane up here again to. I found that years ago that they have something. It was first introduced to me as CRT glasses for people sat at computers back when they had CRTs, and they were focused for about that distance. And it struck me, that's my preaching distance. So I have my preaching glasses. But now I'd like to start by asking you, what's your favorite passage in the Bible? You can just think about that. Anybody have a favorite they'd like to share? You do, but you're not going to say it here in public. Yeah. Well, mine used to be 1 Corinthians 13. Now, I still love it. And it greatly helped me to start my spiritual journey. I think as a young man, I found it so attractive that it kept me close to God, so close that I could not leave God. It hasn't lessened in my affection. It's just that there are a number of other passages that rise up occasionally and fill me and inspire me just as much. And I'd like to take a little break and share one of them with you. And it's the end of the story of what is often called the parable of the prodigal son. Now, the father who represents God tells his oldest son, who, like the younger son, can represent us. And the older son especially, I think, represents us long-time church goers, if you're one of those. And he tells him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. And that verse has continued to overwhelm me. Because like a lot of churchgoers, the older son doesn't seem to care. But as I developed a strong relationship with Christ and realized that I have been surrounded by the whole body of Christ most of my life, I, like the older son, have always been with God. And everything God has to offer is mine. Is that cheating to throw in another quick sermon while you're preaching a different one? But this sermon is about 1 Corinthians 13. I heard someone quote parts of it not long ago, and I realized that I just didn't come back to it often enough. And I'm hoping some of you are like that too. This sermon is a mixture of a sermon and a simple Bible study, and I call it a celebration of 1 Corinthians 13. And first, I want to say just a little bit about the end, get that out of the way. Because years ago, it confused me, and I've often had many people, mostly older folk, ask me about it, and it was because we grew up reading the King James Version, and we knew the phrase faith, hope, and charity. And people like me have wondered, perhaps some of you have wondered, how and why did the word charity get replaced with the word love? And it's very simple. The Greek word being translated is agape, which we can think of as godly love. And when the King James Bible was written, an English word for that was charity. And as time went by, when Christians would help others because of the godly love they had, these godly love acts became known as charity acts, and And the word charity stopped being used to mean godly love, but changed to being used for these acts and organizations that do them, which we call charities today. So when the King James Version was written, the word charities was a perfect translation. But in the modern world, charity is no longer a good translation, but the word love is a great one. Now, one thing I have recognized about this passage as I started studying the Bible in detail is that I don't think chapter 13, verse 1 is a really a good place to start to understand it. I think we all know the Bible didn't originally come divided into chapters. And I think we're all glad that somebody did do that. I have never heard anybody suggest they want to do away with the chapters and verses. You had to put them somewhere. But I think if we start at the beginning of chapter 13, we can miss part of what Paul is saying here. We need to go back to chapter 12. And I'm going to start with just parts of a summary of chapter 12. Now, in this earlier section, Paul is going to great lengths to say poetically that all Christians are of equal worth and we're all in this together. Now, there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. Wisdom, knowledge, faith, healing, powerful deeds, discernment of spirits, various kinds of tongues, and the interpretation of tongues. It's an impressive list of gifts. But Paul is listing them here so that he can then say, hey, these gifts are important. But I want you to realize that there's something even more important. He's saying, some of you are important in the eyes of the world, and some of you are not at all. Now you are members of Christ and individually members of it. And if you just wandered off the street today, came in here, or if you just started loving the Lord recently, even if it just started today, you are as much a part of the body of Christ as anyone in here. And the people in here who know God the best know that you are one of us and welcome you with all our hearts. Paul says to strive for gifts, but always remember there is something more important than having gifts. Paul says all that about gifts, not because he's that interested in the gifts. He says all of that to introduce you to what he does want to say. And what he wants to say is, I will show you a still more excellent way. It is very important to Paul that we understand it. Starting with 1 Corinthians 13, verse 1. Chapter 12 ended with, I will show you a more excellent way. And he starts verse 13 with, if I speak in the tongues of humans and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And I thought maybe I should have brought a clanging cymbal in here to demonstrate. Not one of those pretty ones you hear in orchestras, but an ugly, clanging one. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, I've discovered over the years to my embarrassment, that I am often what we call a know-it-all. Now that's where I told my wife to jump in and say, "Oh no, Charlie, you're not a know-it-all," but she missed her cue. Well, when I do recognize that in me, I don't like it. I can work on that, and I do, but I don't think I can completely help it. It makes me think of the first sin, the one we've heard about so often back in the Garden of Eden. It was to disobey God and to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the snake said, "Then you'll know as much as God knows." Now that's got to be the height of achievement for a know-it-all. Do you know as much as most people in this church? Do you know more than most people in this church? But wouldn't it be neat to understand all mysteries and all knowledge? Wouldn't God be proud of us? Not necessarily, because even if I understand all mysteries and all knowledge, but do not have love, I'm nothing. How about faith? And I have all faith so as to remove mountains. How about tithing and giving in a way that really helps people? Wouldn't God be proud of me if I tithe? Not necessarily, because even if you give away 10% of your possessions, because even if you give away all of your possessions, verse 3, if I give away all my possessions. And that brings me to something I think we can all agree on that is grand, the ultimate sacrifice. If someone sacrifices their life for a heroic cause, and I think of all our military heroes who did sacrifice their lives for others. But if I hand over my body so that I may boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. If any of you join the military and were thereby offering to die for us, remember this: if you do not have love, you gain nothing in God's eyes. You'll certainly gain our respect and gratitude, but that doesn't mean you'll gain God's favor if you don't have love. Think about that. If you find yourself in a foxhole with the enemy nearby trying to kill you, now contemplate the enormous amount of love that Christ had for us while he was on the cross. Now Paul tells us a little about what love is, and I think this is the most beautiful section of the chapter, if not the entire Bible. It's something I can't read to myself or out loud without being almost overwhelmed by its beauty. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable. It keeps no record of wrongs. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. That is, to me, so beautiful, and it also convicts me because I fall short on all of those so often. It's a goal. We are told this thing, which the more I think about it is more and more reassuring to me. Love never ends. The other stuff does end. As for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. But love never ends. If you see love coming down the road like a freight train or just like a breeze, either join it or get out of the way. Because if you're not on board, you'll find you're in the way, and love will run you over and win you over. Because love never ends. It will chase you to the end of time. Evil and hate, our anger cannot outlast it. And now something all of us know-it-alls and all the most respected theologians need to remember, and we need to remember it about the Christian teachers and pastors we admire even the most. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. We will never know as much as God knows. But in the fullness of time, which is one of my favorite phrases, in the fullness of time, when God's plan is ultimately revealed to us, when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. And for a long time, I heard this wrong, because I think when I was a child, and my wife will tell you this is hard to believe, but I think at some point I was misbehaving. I think somebody quoted that to me and told me that I should stop acting childish. But that's not what it means at all. It merely acknowledges the way children are. I think all of us have observed children and thought how sweet it is that they can think the way they do sometimes. Paul is simply using the fact that children think and reason like children, but we eventually grow out of it and think like adults. We can't think like children anymore. And Paul continues this line of thinking. Like children see things through their eyes, we in this life are actually like that too, to God. Paul says, for now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. There are many who will tell you so much about God and exactly how all of that works. They'll tell you what heaven is like and so many other things. But the specifics of what we know is very, very little. And that's okay. The only thing about that I can feel I really know is that it's going to be better than I can imagine. So there's no need to worry about it. For in the fullness of time we will know. Then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part. Then I will know fully even as I have been fully known. But for now, here's most of what Paul is writing about that he wants us to know. And now, faith, hope, and love remain, these three. And the greatest of these is love. And the greatest of these is love. The greatest of these is love. Amen.